All right, we are on video module 61, and we're going to do, we're in kind of deep into the contracts. We did the consumer notice before, and now we're going to get into the buyer agency agreement. And Ashley and Andrew are here with me. Ashley is a new licensed realtor. She passed her test, which is good. And for some reason, this camera is showing me as an orange person. I don't know why I'm orange, but to deal with that. And so what we're going to do is you guys both have buyer's agencies in front of you, just to make sure we're all looking at the same thing. It should be in the name of David and Rebecca Smith. Does that sound about right? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically, you know, to set it up, we've gone through the consumer notice, right? We've talked about seller agency, buyer agency, dual agency, designated agency, transaction licensee, the 10 commandments on the back. They've signed it, and at this point, maybe we've met them at the house once and kind of showed them what a buyer's agency looks like and said, you know, we'll sign one for just this house, and then if you see value in me and it looks like it makes sense to work together in the future as you get more serious, we'll sign a buyer's agency, which will allow me to kind of work on your behalf and represent your interests and that sort of thing. And maybe they asked us to see a second home, and we met them and we were like, yeah, remember that document? So if I'd love to work with you. We just got to go over some formalities, or remember this buyer's agency thing. It allows me to talk freely and work for you. Good news is we're contract free. If you remember in the presentation, if at any time you're not thrilled with what I'm doing, you think somebody can do a better job, you can cancel at any time. But again, this just allows me to work for you. And so we would just go over that with them. And the way to go over it is we would have it pre-printed at the top. It says at the very top, note, the terms buyer, seller, agreement of sale, and purchase will also be construed to mean tenant, landlord, lease, and rent, respectively, through the agreement. It's probably not something I would review with them, right? I'm just saying it to you. And then we have the brokerage information and the licensee information. The licensee would be your name, okay? And then contact information there. It's amazing. We still have a line for a fax. I don't know that we've received a fax since 1998, but it's there. So then buyer's name. You know, you'd want to put the buyer's full name. I like to. This one doesn't have it. I like to put their middle initial on there. So she didn't, which is not the end of the world, but I like to put it on there because when I go to fill out the buyer's agency, normally the deed is going to have we're going to want the deed to have their middle initial on it, typically, because that's a legal document, and the more specific we can get in identifying who this human being is on the deed, the better. And so we'd have a middle initial there. And the thing that the lawyer who draws up the deed will look at to determine what it should say is the agreement of sale when we write the offer. And the thing that we often use when we're writing the offer is the buyer's agency. So it's helpful just to start out with their middle initial. But if you don't, nobody will see this but our office. So it's fine. Plenty of people don't. And then when you do the agreement of sale, you would say what's your middle initial. Their mailing address you can put in there. Their contact information is important to put on there. And then the next one is buyer understands that this buyer agency contract is between broker and buyer. Key question should have been asked way before this point. Does buyer have a buyer's agency with another broker? Right? That should have been LP Mama way back on the first phone call. If they do in some other state, you would want to ask me about that. To say, hey, they said they do, but it's not here, and we would want to determine if there's a conflict or not. And then it says, you know, this starting and ending dates right under that. It says term, and there's a disclosure there. What's that say, Andrew? In 1A.
No association of realtors has set or recommended the term of this contract. Broker, licensee, and buyer have discussed and agreed upon the length of term of this contract. Broker may be paid a fee that is a percentage of the purchase price, even though broker's fee or a portion of it may be paid by seller or listing broker. Broker will continue to represent the interest of buyer.
All right, so the first sentence is pretty clear. It's the same as the consumer notice. It basically is saying everything's negotiable, right? There's no set standard for any of this stuff. And so the term is completely negotiable. It can be whatever we decide it to be. And then the second one, if you read that, what do you guys think the spirit of that sentence is trying to say?
No.
Starting with broker may be paid. The second and third line.
That this is implying that this is an employment contract, and with that there may come some sort of fee along with the purchase of a home.
That's definitely one concept that it's trying to convey. What else? When you take both of those sentences together, the last two sentences.
I mean, even though, like they said, we can negotiate 9 times out of 10, we can usually get the seller to pay, the 3%.
Yeah.
So negotiating that, even though we're still due a fee in a way, but it provides that opportunity to negotiate that.
Regardless of who sells or who pays the fees on the home, we're always working in the interest of the buyer.
Yeah, it's clearing up this. Yeah. It's clearing up this like potential misunderstanding that a typical like logical person might think. Well, if I'm not paying you and you're getting paid by the listing broker, they're obligated to pay half of their fee. So they charge 6% to the seller, and they're gonna give you 3%, and that's how you get paid. How do you represent me if you're getting paid by them? That's the question that somebody might think, and this is addressing. It's like that's the case, and even though you're getting paid by that party, the representation is directed towards the buyer. All right, and then 1B, Ashley, go ahead and read that bold.
This contract applies to any property that buyer chooses to purchase during the term of this contract. Buyer will not enter into a buyer agency contract with another broker/licensee that begins before the ending date of this contract.
Yep. And so that's pretty clear. It's exclusive. It's exclusive. Any property, right? So we already talked to them. Hey, if you run into a for sale by owner or a new construction home that's not listed, let us know. We'll be involved in that as well. Well, this is pretty clear in bold. It's any property. It doesn't have to be listed, and they can't enter into another contract. Starting date. Typically, we'll leave that blank because it'll start when they sign it. And ending date. A lot of times we'll put in 6 months. I've seen agents put in 12 months. I've seen agents put in 3 months. I've seen agents put in 1 month. I've seen agents put in 1 day, and I've seen agents put it for this property. If you have a qualified buyer whose LP mama checks out, motivation's good, you're going to put in some work, it's probably helpful to go to 6 months. Because in my opinion, if you go long, and this is your discretion, right? There's no policy on this. It's up to you. If you go longer than 6 months, you can get into a relationship with somebody who you're like, I don't want to show homes anymore to this person. They're never going to buy. But I feel obligated because I'm in this contract. So it's helpful to have an end date, and 6 months is a good time period. 3 months is okay. A day or a week, if you're going to devote to this person, isn't great unless it's the first time you've met them and it's the only thing they'll do. Mm-hmm. So now I do believe in this concept, separate conversation of if you're just going to do it for this property, it's the first time you met them, and we're going through that whole script that was in Kay and I's role play, like, hey, before I show you this home, just so we can talk further, this is a form you have to sign. Don't worry, it's just for this property. It expires when we walk out the door. And it's, again, so I can talk freely about the property on your behalf. That's a different conversation. That's more of, we'll do one freebie where it's just for this house, because you don't know me, I don't know you. If we do a second house, we'll look to enter into a bit of a relationship. But there is a bit of an art. And that's when you're going to do the 3 to 6 months one, the second time, right? You just have to use your judgment though. You sit down with somebody and they're really loving on you, and you get some people that are just really laid back, and they're like, yeah, we want a buyer's agent. We want you to help us. We've heard good things about the team. What do we do? Well, you just be like, we're going to represent your interests. Here's what the process looks like. This is a buyer's agency, allows me to represent you. We're going to do it for the next 6 months. If you can't find a property in 6 months, we can always extend it, right? And sign here. So that's the conversation with somebody who's super open. Somebody who's pretty difficult, you have to use what tools you have to determine whether it's going to be a 1 day just for this property or maybe a 3 month or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Deciding the term?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. If buyer's negotiating or has entered into an agreement of sale, this contract ends upon settlement. So if the date of ending is tomorrow, so if it's 12, according to this one, that ends on 12/31. If it's December 30th and you enter into an agreement of sale with a settlement in March, this statement is saying this is still valid through March. You don't have to change the end date of the contract.
Okay.
Does that concept make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Any questions on the first section? Okay.
Nope.
Section 2. Andrew, what's it? Section 2A?
Broker's fee. No association of realtors has set or recommended the broker's fee. Broker and buyer have negotiated the fee broker will receive for performing real estate services for buyer.
Yeah. And that again is stating what the consumer notice is saying, right? There's no set fee. It's negotiable. It's telling the consumer that. All right. B, Ashley. B1.
Broker's fee paid by buyer to broker is as follows. A, in a purchase transaction with the seller represented by a real estate broker, the fee is, in this case, 3% of the sales price, or whichever is greater, and an additional $445.
Right. And so what's that basically saying? Well, this is a transaction where the seller's represented.
Mm-hmm.
And let me ask you a question. What if the seller is only paying their listing agent 5%? What will happen based upon how this reads?
Say that again?
If the seller is paying their real estate agent 5%, and it's typical or customary, not legal, but customary that listing agents pay buyer's agent half of their fee.
Mm-hmm.
Based on what is in this current buyer's agency, what would happen financially to the buyer?
My only guess would be that, if it's 5% and they're giving us, 2%?
2.5.
Or 2.5%, half of that, then we're missing technically a 0.5%. So I guess two things could happen. Either we could try and negotiate that, or then maybe the buyer might have to pay the remaining.
Yep. So either
5%.
Either the buyer is going to pay the 0.5%, just cash as part of their closing costs. They're going to remit that, or else we're just going to. Well, the buyer's going to pay it. The question is, are they paying it out of their pocket, or are we going to ask for an extra? Say it's a $200,000 property. 0.5% of that is $1,000. We might say to the seller, we might say to the buyer, you are already asking the seller for $5,000 in seller help, and offering them $200. Since the fee arrangement here is that our brokerage is only getting 2.5% from the listing broker, we'll need to make up that 0.5%. Instead of it coming out of your pocket, why don't I try to negotiate that? And I'll ask for $6,000 in seller help from the seller on your offer. And then when the seller gives you the closing cost credit on your cost sheet, you'll still pay the $1,000, but your closing costs will be reduced by $6,000 as opposed to $5,000. So really, the seller's taking care of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stop this recording here.
Is that? I'm sure that happens every now and then, but is that? Do you find that most is like 6%, or does it happen pretty frequently like that?
It's uncommon that it's 5, but
uncommon.
it does happen.
Mm-hmm.